It's deeply satisfying when an accurate piece of detail is successfully implemented in the otherwise fabricated world of a movie. The best details in this respect are the ones that the audience usually never notices, tongue-in-cheek inclusions blending effortlessly into the backdrop despite staring the viewer directly in the face. So with that in mind, this is Whatculture, and here are insanely accurate movie details you never noticed. Number 10. Henry's ring, the king. While The King may not have maximised the potential presented by its enviable ensemble cast, the Timothée Chalamet-led effort is still a rip-roaring experience. Based on a number of plays from William Shakespeare's Henriade, David Michaud's picture chronicles the rise of King Henry V of England. Entertaining it may be, but factually accurate this 2019 offering is not. Ironically, for a film that takes such liberties with recorded history, The King still features a notable piece of accurate detail. Furthermore, it's so subtle that it likely would have gone missed by all but the most eagle-eyed historians. Chalamet's take on this seminal Shakespearean character can be seen wearing a signet ring, pretty standard fare for an epic historical outing. However, upon closer inspection, the emblem inlaid into the ring is none other than the real-life Henry V's actual signature. It's a minute piece of detail and incredibly easy to miss, highlighting the production's dedication to capturing an authentic screenshot of 15th century England.
Sharon Tate's actual jewelry is visible once upon a time in Hollywood, fully immersing his audience in the world of Hollywood in the late 60s. Quentin Tarantino's magnificent Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a movie absolutely dripping with fascinating detail. Now sure, QT isn't a bloke known for being entirely historically accurate when it comes to his pictures, with the director often choosing to rewrite it entirely when chucking out a story set in his realer-than-real universe. But that doesn't mean that a few easily missed but still quite authentic features don't pop up in his never-dull movies every now and then. Take the Playboy Mansion sequence in this 2019 tale, for example. Rather than dressing up another random mansion for the scenes, the director opted to shoot at the real deal. And then you have Margot Robbie's Sharon Tate, who is actually sporting some of the jewelry once worn by the tragically murdered star in real life during her time on screen in the movie. It was Sharon's sister, Deborah Tate, who gave Robbie the jewelry to show off in the film. And the Australian actor would later tell Today that it was kind of sometimes very sad to be that closely connected with real-life Sharon. But that little bit of detail was certainly a nice way to lace the spirit of the real-life Hollywood star into QT's world.
Peripheral vision check, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. The 2005 action comedy Mr. and Mrs. Smith, starring Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie as the eponymous couple John and Jane. The movie follows the pair of competing assassins with the twist that they are married to each other, with no knowledge of their partner's vocation. An early sequence depicts the duo visiting a fairground for their first date, where they take part in a rifle range. Jane initially feigns incompetence with the weapon, but John only misses one shot, accrediting his success to beginner's luck. His ultra-competitive soon-to-be wife then proceeds to effortlessly gun down every single target, teasing her new beau with the same excuse. Viewers were probably too busy smirking at Mr. Smith's comeuppance to notice a superb piece of weapon-oriented detail. As John takes his turn, he quickly closes his eye and opens it again just before he fires. This innocuous action is actually a common practice among seasoned marksmen. It's done to retain peripheral vision, allowing the shooter to take in their surrounding area while simultaneously aiming down their scope. A bona fide blink-and-you'll-miss-it piece of authentic detail.
A highly accurate banknote, Luca. Whenever a movie is set in the past, there's always a chance something as small and seemingly insignificant as the cash used around that time and in that part of the world will let the side down. In the case of Pixar's 2021 feature about a young sea monster who possesses the ability to transform into a human though, the studio went the extra mile when it came to one little Luca detail in this sweet animation. You see, there's a point in the tale set in the Italian town of Porto Rosso around 1959 when the titular sea monster Alberto and Giulia throw down the money to compete in the Porto Rosso Cup, which is a triathlon consisting of a swimming section, pasta eating section, and biking section. Sounds tough. And if you look closely at the cash slammed down on the table by Giulia here, you'll spot an Italian 500 lira banknote. But this isn't just any old random lira, folks. As pointed out by a viewer on our movie details, this was the Crown of Spikes version of the note originally released in 1947. In other words, this specific note would have still been used around this time in Italy, meaning that director Enrico Casarosa and his crew made sure that even the tiniest animated detail was period accurate in this marvelous Italian adventure. Now I've got a quick question for you. What do you think is the best Pixar movie of the last decade? Was it Luca or something else? You let me know in the comment section down below, baby.
Turing's Dentures, The Imitation Game. 2014's The Imitation Game received a wave of critical acclaim and a slew of awards. Unfortunately, the biographical thriller charting the life of legendary World War II codebreaker Alan Turing also received its fair share of criticism. The picture was lambasted for downplaying the importance of the wider codebreaking team at Bletchley Park, as well as Turing's homosexuality and personality. With that being said, leading man Benedict Cumberbatch seized the opportunity to highlight his dedication to the role with a piece of impressively accurate detail, wearing an exact copy of Turing's dentures throughout filming. There's going above and beyond in pursuit of legitimacy, and then there's this. Now, technically speaking, Cumberbatch's choice to use a replica of the dentures was entirely unnecessary. Nobody would have even registered the fact that he was using an exact copy of Turing's false teeth, but it's insanely accurate nonetheless. It's a crying shame that this laser-focused authenticity wasn't directed towards a genuine representation of how the Enigma cipher device was actually cracked.
The explosion sounds, World Trade Center. Focusing on the world-changing real-life 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers, Oliver Stone's 2006 World Trade Center drama inevitably contains some rather disturbing moments. But one of the most subtle of these came in the form of some highly accurate sounds heard as the New York City police officers got closer to the harrowing scene unfolding in front of them in the film. If you listen closely, you'll hear a collection of bangs and what sounds like explosions when the likes of Michael Peña's Officer Will Gemino and co. walk towards the chaos. It was noted by some of the individuals who survived the horrifying events of the September 11, 2001 terror attacks that this was actually the sound of people who jumped from the towers that day hitting the ground. Just taking in the surreal visuals of this depiction of the infamous day was already a hugely distressing experience, but this additional little audible detail really forces the audience to understand the horrifying truth of what it must have felt like to be so close to this terrifying situation.
Lawrence writes in Real Arabic, Lawrence of Arabia. Chronicling the life of British Army officer and archaeologist T.E. Lawrence, 1962's Lawrence of Arabia is widely regarded as one of the greatest films ever made. Starring Peter O'Toole in the titular role, David Lean's offering features performances, cinematography, and scriptwriting of the highest order. While much of the movie is heavily embellished for dramatic effect, intricate care was taken in bringing the legendary figure to life. An integral aspect of Lawrence's identity was his divided allegiance between his homeland and his newfound allies. As such, his immersion in the Arabian culture had to be believable to lend credence to O'Toole's performance. This status quo provided the bedrock for a gorgeous piece of inscrutable detail. Composing a letter to Anthony Quinn's Audal Boutai, Lawrence can be seen writing from right to left. This is the traditional style of Semitic script, proving that he can read and write in Arabic. It's no accident either. Lawrence switches directions when he finishes the message to sign his name in English. Nowadays, the revelation that Lawrence of Arabia could write in Arabic may not come across as particularly shocking, but it's still an easily missable inclusion and an insanely accurate one to boot. And while I have you guys, make sure you let us know down in the comments of your example of a movie containing a particular detail where you thought, wow, I can't believe they included that. And you know the rest. While you're there, make sure you give us a like and a subscribe. Alright, now back to the list.
A super accurate reload, Heat. The word masterpiece gets thrown around a lot, but when discussing Michael Mann's gripping crime epic Heat, it's about as accurate as the glorious detail sprinkled throughout. For an example of the level of thought Mann, the film's crew, and his stars put into even some of the tiniest of beats, look no further than the visual of Val Kilmer's Chris Shiherlis reloading in the middle of the absolutely thrilling bank robbery sequence. During this moment, Shiherlis is shown swiftly reloading his assault rifle, chucking in a new mag before unleashing a hail of bullets. But if you're really paying close attention here, you can actually just about hear the sound of Kilmer's character tapping said mag on the car in front of him before reloading. Why? Well, as pointed out by a viewer on our movie details, this was actually something real-life soldiers are regularly seen doing, with the tapping of a mag ensuring that the rounds within are seated properly and keeping the weapon from jamming. Hell, Kilmer did such an accurate and impressive job reloading on camera, the actor even revealed that the Marines showed their troops footage of him in action, adding that these maggots were told, if you can't change a clip as fast as this actor, then get out of my army. Yeah, that'll show 'em.
Gill's species, Finding Nemo. After being placed in a Sydney dentist's fish tank, young clownfish Nemo meets the Tank Gang, led by Willem Dafoe's Gill. A fellow former ocean resident, the world-weary fish dreams of nothing but escape. Despite being scarred during a breakout attempt, his appetite for liberation never wavers. On the surface, Gill's raison d'etre appears to be no more than a product of his environment. In reality, it's actually a sly nod to his species. While he is never referred to as such, Gill is a Moorish idol, easily identifiable by his distinctive black and white markings. Moorish idols are notoriously difficult to maintain in captivity, hence Gill's constant yearning for freedom. They require enormous tanks and a carefully selected diet. They will literally starve to death rather than eat something that they do not want. As such, it becomes clear that the choice of Gill's species was no accident.
Attacks in a standard round, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. Along with being one of the most surprisingly entertaining features of 2023, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves actually boasts one consistent detail, which fans of the titular role-playing game would agree is about as accurate as it gets. For those of you who are not avid D&D players, a standard combat round in the game lasts for just 6 seconds of in-game time, and this was actually something the film managed to inject into the action time and time again too. During many of the sequences which showed off the likes of Michelle Rodriguez's Holger Kilgore, Chris Pine's Edgin Darvis and the rest of the gang fighting off their enemies, their attacks usually go down in 6-second intervals. It's an easy to overlook detail, but one that makes stuff like the group's exciting showdown with Red Wizard Sophina in the film's climax feel that little more faithful to the game the story is based on. Cheers for checking out this video today, folks. Now hit that subscribe button down below for more Whatculture stuff in your day.
Vincent Vega's bathroom breaks, Pulp Fiction. Lost in the masterful chaos of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, a minor background detail often goes unnoticed. The detail in question? That would be the frequency with which Vincent Vega has to attend the restroom. Something terrible frequently seems to happen whenever Vincent finds himself on the toilet. John Travolta's hitman is busy in the bathroom when Pumpkin and Bunny hold up a diner, and Mia Wallace gruesomely overdoses as he is on the toilet. He even meets his own demise after going to see a man about a horse, gunned down by Bruce Willis's Butch. However, there's more to this motif than you may realize. Constipation is a well-known side effect of heroin abuse. As viewers are soon made aware, Vincent is a prolific user of the drug, ergo the constant trips to the lavatory. Knowing Tarantino's love for such touches, this wonderfully disguised inclusion is no accident. Now, heroin may not have killed Vincent directly, but it brought about the circumstances behind his downfall.
Neil Armstrong's disappearing watch, First Man. A few years after sending Ryan Gosling into the world of jazz, Damien Chazelle reunited with his La La Land star for First Man, this time blasting the actor off into space as the first man to walk on the moon, Neil Armstrong, instead. And while not absolutely every detail on show in the 2018 picture could be classed as entirely accurate, it's still never been confirmed whether Armstrong actually dropped his daughter's bracelet into a crater on the big rock in the sky. The presence and disappearance of one little piece of jewelry was very much on the money here though. As Armstrong prepares for liftoff and the beginning of the Apollo 11 spaceflight, the astronaut can be seen wearing his Omega Speedmaster whilst walking down a corridor in his spacesuit. However, when he's later seen taking those first small steps for man on the moon, the watch has suddenly disappeared, though the average viewer likely didn't even catch that it had gone walkabouts. This was precisely what went down in real life though, with Armstrong Armstrong actually opting to leave his watch on the lunar module as a backup timer. And this meant Buzz Aldrin's own Speedmaster was ultimately the first watch on the moon, despite Armstrong's feet hitting the surface before his.
The persistent G-string, Snowpiercer. One of the 2010's most underrated offerings, Bong Joon-ho's Snowpiercer is an audaciously visceral watch. The 2013 film depicts the class struggle aboard the titular locomotive, following an extinction event that wiped out the planet's population. Snowpiercer is laden with dark, inscrutable detail from start to finish, but the best comes around the halfway mark. In the build-up to the horrific massacre perpetrated against the tale's section's inhabitants, a violinist can be seen playing a haunting score. Upon closer examination, his instrument is revealed to only have one string left, breaking in jarring fashion just before the slaughter commences. This represents a marvelous credible detail in itself, as violin strings would have likely perished in the time since the end of humanity. However, the intricacy behind this visual element runs far deeper. The remaining string happens to be the G string, the lowest note on the violin, as well as the thickest and strongest iteration. As such, it makes perfect sense that this would be the final string to break.
Christian Bale's accurate hat, Hostiles. Throughout Scott Hooper's 2017 stunning and at times ruthless western Hostiles, Christian Bale brings to life Indian Wars veteran Captain Joseph J. Blocker, with this soldier being commanded to escort a Cheyenne war chief back to their Montana home. Blocker isn't taking on this task entirely on his own though. He's joined by a detail of younger soldiers, one containing a number of other big-name stars like Jesse Plemons and Timothée Chalamet, and it's when this group of US troops are occupying a frame together when a rather interesting, highly accurate and largely missed detail pops up on screen. As pointed out by another viewer on our movie details, Bale's captain was a veteran of the Sioux War, with that taking place in 1876, and it was during that period when black campaign hats were originally issued to members of the US Army. However, from 1883 onwards, drab brown hats were actually given out to troops instead, with this being evident in the fact the younger soldiers in the movie all boast that kind rather than the black style worn by their captain. The sort of historically accurate detail you can tip your own cap to, right?
Romeo y Julieta Cigars, Darkest Hour. 2017 biographical drama Darkest Hour earned Gary Oldman his first Academy Award win for his take on British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Following the politician's early days in office, the critically acclaimed picture concludes with Churchill's iconic "We shall fight on the beaches" speech to the House of Commons. Donning a bodysuit and prosthetic face to lend legitimacy to his depiction of the British Bulldog, Oldman produces a stellar performance. Such care was taken in producing a credible portrait of Winnie that Oldman even smoked the exact same cigars as Churchill, a Cuban brand entitled Romeo y Julieta after Shakespeare's tragic fictional lovers. It turned out to be an exceedingly expensive, accurate detail to boot. Oldman reluctantly puffed his way through more than 400 of the expensive cigars throughout the film's production. Not only did that amount to $20,000 of Darkest Hour's $30 million budget, but the actor managed to give himself acute nicotine poisoning in the process.
The crowd bros, Oppenheimer. The great Christopher Nolan is a director known for not wasting a single inch of a frame when it comes to the making of each of his captivating pictures. Oppenheimer was no different. For example, if you really focus on the gripping Louis Strauss Senate hearing scenes in particular, you'll actually be able to catch a quite brilliant and historically accurate detail Nolan masterfully dropped in that had secretly been staring you right in the face. While you were probably and rather understandably too busy being completely mesmerized by the performances being produced by the likes of Robert Downey Jr. as Strauss and Rami Malek as David L. Hill to notice on a first watch, the crowd in the background of these scenes actually gradually gets bigger as the film goes on. This was seemingly Nolan's way of accurately reflecting how the Strauss hearing had ultimately grown into a national story by the time the aforementioned Hill testified in 1959. A scathing and superbly acted on-screen testimony which actually also contained a number of lines that were lifted right from the real-life transcripts of the Senate hearing. But simply, Nolan managed to not just make what could have been rather dull sit-down Senate sequences remarkably thrilling, he also subtly injected a ton of highly accurate elements into them too.
Unzeroed scope, Saving Private Ryan. Anyone who has seen Saving Private Ryan will know that Daniel Jackson is a skilled marksman who is capable of nailing an enemy through his own rifle scope at a range of 450 yards. However, the final battle in Steven Spielberg's 1998 World War II epic gives the viewer reason to pause. Firing from a bell tower as the German forces swarm Rommel, Jackson misses more shots in a few minutes than he had throughout the entire movie. So why the sudden change in accuracy? The sharpshooter can be seen switching between two different scopes throughout the film, a Urity 8x optic and an M73B 2.5x counterpart. The increased magnification of the Urity means that it requires frequent adjustment to account for the range between the sniper and more distant targets. Jackson's frequent scope swapping and the recurrent need to calibrate the Urity for different distances causes it to become unzeroed. This essentially means that his crosshairs don't correlate with the bullet's actual point of impact. As a result, he suddenly finds himself missing far more often than one would expect from a sniper of his capabilities.
Do not get between a mama bear and her cub, the Revenant. Undoubtedly one of the most brutal animal attacks ever to roar onto the big screen. The horrific visual of Leonardo DiCaprio's Hugh Glass being ripped apart by a grizzly bear in Alejandro Giannaritu's The Revenant is still a tough old watch to this day. According to wildlife ecologist Ray Wynn Grant in an insider video talking about various movie bear attacks, it's also a super accurate depiction of what being mauled by this mammal would look like. In fact, there's one subtle detail the average viewer likely didn't catch in this scene that stood out to Wynn Grant as a giant real-life no-no if you wanted to remain among the living. In the moments before Glass is violently attacked by the animal, he's seen pointing his weapon at an innocent cub. Mama Bear then pops up behind the fur trapper before launching a vicious assault. As Wynn Grant noted, a female bear dedicates her life to keeping her offspring safe. And the second anything positions itself between herself and her baby, she sees that as a threat. People are advised to get as far away from a bear cub as humanly possible the minute you see one in the wild. Because if you don't, well, there's a strong chance you'll suffer the same fate as Glass.
The Grand Staircase Clock, Titanic. Led by Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio, James Cameron's Titanic blended the actual version of events behind the eponymous vessel sinking with one of cinema's most iconic love stories. The 1997 Oscar magnate was widely lauded for its accuracy. Cameron's picture depicted historical accounts from the night of the tragedy, most famously the musicians who continued to play as the ship split apart and sank. Titanic features a number of precise details, but the film's most well-hidden example doesn't arrive until the closing sequences. As Rose passes away in her sleep in the present day, she is reunited with Jack at the Titanic's Grand Staircase. The scene's emotional nature distracts from one final piece of carefully selected background detail: the staircase's ornate clock. The dial reads 2:20, the precise moment that the real ship sank into the North Atlantic's icy depths. This isn't the only slick time-orientated detail to be found in the iconic disaster offering. If Titanic was comprised solely of the scenes set in 1912, the movie would last for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And this just happens to be the exact amount of time that it took the actual vessel to sink.
Highly accurate chance formations and tactics, Alexander. It may not have been celebrated as one of the greatest historical epics of all time upon its release in 2004. Quite the opposite, in fact, being widely panned and flopping at the box office. But Oliver Stone's picture about Alexander the Great did actually come with some seriously accurate details. When it came to the Battle of Gaugamela scene in particular, historian Dr. Roel Keneldig was quick to point out a number of little moments within the war, which were way more historically correct than you likely realize when first sitting through this sequence. The chants for the war god Aeneas heard as the Macedonians prepare to engage are actually somewhat accurate, with the film smartly using the real-life war cry they were said to have used as a way for the various extras to keep the rhythm of their march. Kenyendig would then also add that everything from the 16x16 Macedonian phalanx formation scene to Alexander's cavalry moving off and trying to separate the Persian wing opposite them from the rest of the army, creating a gap that would then be charged into while other troops behind the Macedonian cavalry kept the left wing occupied, were all accurate details based on accounts of this specific battle. Sure, Alexander still ended up earning itself a few Razzie nominations and becoming the movie that Colin Farrell thought would end his career, but it at least boasted the most accurate depiction of ancient combat that we have according to this expert. So that's something. Woohoo!